Welcome to a special episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have with us Sarah Laverty here from TrainerRoad. And we also have Dr. Jose Areta joining us. He's a lecturer in sports nutrition at Liverpool John Moores University. And we are actually, Sarah, was not the case. Last week you were under the weather. Nate was under the weather. We were going to discuss a study. We actually then had some questions. So we reached out to Dr. Areta about those questions. And he was like, yeah, and I'd be happy to come on and talk about it. So here we are. It's pretty exciting. Dr. Areta, and Sarah's really going to lead this one because this is a study that Sarah's analyzed and gone through. But really quick, can you just let us know kind of your past and how you became a researcher, where you're at now at Liverpool John Moores? I guess the quick version of that.
Yeah, cool. I'll try to be succinct. It's quite serendipitous, I suppose. I was originally trained as a biologist with a minor in zoology at the beginning. I'm originally from Argentina, and then I specialized through my PhD in sports nutrition. So I had the opportunity to do a PhD at in Australia, RMIT University, back then, going back and forth between RMIT University and the Australian Institute of Sport, which was great exposure to learn from the best people in the field, really, about, how to do research and understand what are the relevant questions in sports nutrition and so on. And then I continued to specialize through my postdoc at the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences for about 3 years in Norway, in Oslo. And since about 6 years ago, I've been a lecturer in sports nutrition at Liverpool John Moores University at the Research Institute of Sports and Exercise Sciences here, which is a well-known research institute in our area, sort of leading the field here.
That's awesome. How cool. That's fantastic. And I'm from Argentina. I love that country. That's amazing. Well, cool. Sarah, I guess just go ahead and kick us off, and I might just chime in every once in a while.
Yeah, for sure. So today we're discussing a case study that Dr. Areta and your colleagues, you guys conducted looking at the energetics, meaning the energy input and the energy output of a professional world tour cyclist competing in the 2023 Tour de France Femmes. So Dr. Areta, what was the motivation behind this study? Like, why did this pique your interest?
Yeah, well, that's a nice question. First of all, we're very interested in moving the field forward in understanding the energy requirements in general of athletic population. We have a particular interest in developing more the research in female athletes, for which there's a very, very little information. So my area of specialization at the minute is all around low energy availability and trying to understand what are the effects of low energy availability in sort of different systems in the body, muscles, like hormonal responses, performance, and so on. So the opportunity to do this is an athlete that I had been sort of helping with for some time in relation to their nutrition and so on. I was not her nutritionist at the time that we did this study, but we had like close ties, and we worked really well together. And the opportunity came up to do this study, so we decided to go forward and have links with the Pennington Biomedical Research Center there in the US and with Professor Leanne Redman. So we had the opportunity to do the double level water assessment of total energy expenditure, which I'm sure we're going to talk about down the line a little bit in this podcast. But yeah, it was, again, a little bit of serendipity. It was all aligned with our interest of research. We had the opportunity to do this at the time, and we decided to move forward.
Cool. And am I right in saying that this is the first of its kind with regard to like studying a female cyclist, at least?
Yes, this is correct. So, female road cycling is a sport that's grown a lot the last few years. And the female Tour de France, it's only had like 3 iterations so far, or 4. Is it 3 or 4? I'm a bit confused now, but this is very, very new. It's nothing like the males. It's been going for like over 100 years. And so there's very little information on, what are the energetic requirements of female athlete at that level. There's generally no or very little assessments of total daily energy expenditure of female athletes, let alone those female athletes who are in the upper end of the spectrum of energy expenditure, as they are the road cyclists, which is a very energy demanding sport. So yeah, this is the first time that this was done.
So what guidelines are, like, prior to this study, what guidelines were female cyclists using to fuel these big events?
Well, you see, in sports nutrition, there's not real differences between guidelines for males and females. This is mainly because there's no evidence to say they should be different. There's not evidence in favor or against that they should be different, really. But the reality is that there are no guidelines because there is no research specific for females. So if you look at the sport and exercise science literature as a whole, research that is female specific only, it's about 6%. So it's a very, very low percentage. So there's a higher percentage of studies that are sort of mixed cohorts, like males and females, but female-specific research is very little. So the guidelines for females at the minute are the same as the guidelines for males, and these guidelines revolve mainly around the nutrition in relation to carbohydrate requirements based on the duration and intensity of exercise. So when you are working with any sort of athletes, one of the things that you manipulate the most is how much carbohydrates they are eating based on how much training volume and intensity they are doing. So those are the guidelines at the minute, really. And whether they should be different between males and females, we don't know. In terms of energetic requirements, we don't know either. And what we know is that, potentially females are a little bit less resilient to periods of energy deficit as compared to men. But we don't really have strong data to support that idea. It's just some evidence suggests that might be the case.
Yeah. Making this then more important, like a very important piece of research that is filling a gap, at least.
That's it. Yeah. So we're starting to have a better idea of what's happening in the field, and we can start saying okay, well, this is what's happening. Is this good? Is this bad? And it opens up, the opportunity for us to start and to do more research that might be more ecologically relevant, ecologically valid, so valid to be applied in the conditions in which these athletes are. Because sometimes we can do things in the lab that are really interesting and they answer some fundamental questions, but we also need to do things that are relevant to what's happening out there in the field.
Yeah, definitely. So who was this athlete? You said you worked with her, but how old was she? What was her specialty? Key characteristics.
No need to give her name, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, you see, these athletes came from a background of rowing. So she was an international level rower for Australia, and she she decided to stop rowing, and very soon she sort of moved into another sport, which was cycling. I have, ties with Australia because of my PhD there, my involvement as an athlete in cycling and as a coach and as a sports nutritionist and so on. So people know me in the area, and this athlete needed help. This was when she was starting cycling, really. And she was like, well, I've never done cycling. I need help with my nutrition for cycling. Like, how does this work? And so we started working. This was early days, and it very soon became evident that she had a talent for cycling as well. Rowing, in particular, heavyweight rowing, which is what she did, transfers really well to the physical capacity for cycling. You see, VO2 max, which is a very important physiological parameter for cycling, is a shared basic capacity for heavyweight rowing and for cycling. So very soon she became really good, and within a period of a year and a bit, she was competing in a world tour level. So that's a little bit of the background of the story. So I can't remember her age right now. I think it was like 29 years old by the time, she had started the Tour de France, if I remember correctly from the information I remember from her.
Yeah. And I guess for the stats, at least from what we can derive from this paper, an FTP of around 297 watts, around 4.3 watts per kilogram, around 71.2 kilograms of body weight, and a body fat percentage of about 20.8%. And all those are like the nerdy details, of course, that all of us listen to this podcast. And it gives us a great bit of context so then we can understand the relativity about all these numbers and their performances later on.
Yeah. And so, and she was a time trial specialist, is that right, Dr. Areta?
Yeah, so because of her characteristics, her sort of physiological anthropometric characteristics, it's a type of cyclist that is better suited to sort of time trials or like, spring classics, or more like all-rounder type athlete. So as you guys well know, different types of cyclists are better suited for different types of races. So lighter cyclists are better, have higher power to weight ratio, better for climbing. Bigger cyclists have more absolute power, which makes them better suited for, maybe going against the wind, but not so much going against gravity.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was she healthy going into this race?
We could say that she was generally healthy, that there were no major complications of any type. As we described in the study, prior to the start of the race, prior to the start of the female Tour the France, she had oligomenorrhea, that is a regular menstrual cycle, and then she had like lower levels of T3. So these two are considered like hallmarks of potentially having been exposed to low energy availability for a prolonged period of time. We cannot say for certain that is the case, but there are indicators that she might have been chronically underfueling before that. But whether we can say she was not healthy in any other way, not really. She was like a perfectly functioning person with no problems in any area of her life, really.
Right. And given you'd worked with her previously, or you'd worked with her for a period of time, were you surprised by the fact that she was low? She had low T3 and had irregular menstrual cycles.
No, I was not. I was not surprised about this fact. This is something that had been, sort of pre-existent before we started working together. We tried to do work to make sure that she had all the fueling she needed at the time that we worked together. We worked together for a period of time, but then because of her own cycling team and my availability of time, and then her involvement with other institutions in Australia and so on, she was handled mainly by her sports nutritionist. And I am sure that we talked about this. I talked directly with her sports nutritionist that the aim was to fuel her appropriately. So it was not a deliberate thing. So it was just how things developed, sort of thing. It was not that myself or her sports nutritionist was like chronically trying to make her like lighter and perform at a lower body weight or anything like that. So it's kind of something that happened.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mean, just to give listeners the context, like overview of the Tour de France. So it involves 956 kilometers over 8 days.
That's right.
90 to 178 kilometers per day. So that varies depending on the stage. Day 8 was the time trial day, and then each stage had varied in the amount that they were climbing, but between 700 and 2,400 meters. So a grueling 8 days. What information were you tracking during those 8 days, and logistically, how did you make that happen?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting study for various reasons. the main thing is that there's no one's really looked at what's happening during a Grand Tour for a female athlete. So that's number one. Number two is that we used sort of the most accurate way of assessing someone's daily energy expenditure, which this is the technique that is called the double labeled water technique. This technique allows you to do an assessment, it's never direct, but it's the most direct estimation of someone's energy expenditure. It's the most accurate way that you can measure someone's energy expenditure while they are out there in the field exercising without, being hooked to a machine, basically, or inside a chamber, where you can basically measure how much energy someone is using. So it's the best way to do that. It's expensive. You see, like one measurement depends on where you are and a number of variables, but one measurement costs about, depends on how much water you need and so on, but it's around like $1,000 to $1,500 US dollars approximately.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not something that you could do on a regular basis. Now I think there are companies that you can do this commercially, but it's typically being used in a research setting, and it's expensive. First of all, because we use double labeled water, which is expensive. This is water that has an atom, has deuterium, and it has which is a heavy atom of hydrogen, and it has oxygen 18, which is also a heavy atom of oxygen. So these are stable isotopes, so it's not non-radioactive. And basically we give a specific amount to the athlete, and then we take urine samples and we see the decay of these isotopes in urine, and this can give us an idea of, or has a direct relationship with the metabolism of the athlete, so you can work out the energy expenditure. So this is the most accurate way of doing it. It's been used in humans for a number of decades. Double labeled water used to be a lot more expensive. Now it's not cheap, but it's more affordable, and this gives us a very objective direct assessment of energy expenditure, which is different from all the other ways that we have to assess energy expenditure, which typically is with heart rate monitors, with indirect assessment, or with power meters. Also, we measure mechanical power there, and we can sort of estimate the metabolic power. But then there's a lot of things that we don't see with this technique. So the fact that we could use that technique, that gives us one single value that is an average for the whole week. So the bad thing of this measurement is that the degree of resolution is not that high. We can only see averages of like a week. But the good thing is that very, very accurate. So the number that we get with that is it's really a number that we can trust, sort of thing. And of course, we also did tracking of the energy intake using a technique that is called the remote food photography method, whereby the athlete, whenever possible, they take a photo of what they eat, they weigh it when possible. So it requires a high degree of commitment of the athlete. We work with an amazing athlete. None of this would have been possible if she didn't put all the effort that she put towards this study, because it really requires a lot from her. Also doing that in the middle of a very, very important race. We are so grateful that, she put that effort, and she was, on the ball. She was like really paying attention to everything. We had a group of people in a WhatsApp group, all the time communicating, knowing exactly what she was doing minute by minute. And of course, during the race, the post-race reporting, she was not like taking selfies, we're on the bike, like looking at to show us, what she was eating and so on. But after the race, she would report precisely, how much beatings she had, what she had in them, what she ate, and so on. So we did that to the highest possible standard. There's always error of measurement, so we have to take whatever measurements we do with care, but we know with how we did it was with the highest possible degree of accuracy. And of course, we also did assessments of body weight, and also did assessments of hydration status with every morning's urine.
That's a lot. And I had questions, by the way, Sarah, so like raise my finger, but ignore me because Dr. Areta already answered them. That was fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. So the doubly labeled water assessment, do you do that before she did the race then?
So we do that. It's basically before the race, she drinks the water. So it's like, I can't remember, I think it was 3 grams per kilo of body weight that she was using. And this is an interesting anecdote, because you give to the participant, you give them the amount of water that they would sort of use based on what you expect for them to be the energy expenditure throughout a period of time. So that water that you give them sort of runs out, and the dose that we gave her was based on, what's been reported previously in the literature for energy expenditure for females and so on. And the idea was to measure the energy expenditure for 2 weeks. So for the week of the race and the week after the race, there was going to be a recovery week. So we would have racing energy expenditure and post-race energy expenditure. The thing is that her metabolism was so high, that the people working in the lab in the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. I was like, oh my God. And basically she used like all the double labeled water that we had, and we could only get the measurement for that first week. So the total energy expenditure for those 8 days was on average, I think it was 7,572 calories per day, which is really high. And when you put it relative to what you expect it to be, the resting energy expenditure of individual is around 4.3 times the resting energy expenditure, which is similar to what it would be for, or what it's been reported to be for males during the male Tour de France. So in terms of energy expenditure, it seems that, at least for that one case that we have measured, that it's very similar for females as it would be for males. And this is the first data showing that, okay, in terms of energy expenditure, they seem to be comparable, males and females.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. I've always been curious about the remote photography method for measuring food intake. How does that work?
Yeah, so the remote food photography method in principle is quite simple. Basically, the individual takes a photo of whatever they are eating at the time, typically with something next to it that can give us the reference of how big the things are. Like it could be like a credit card or like a tennis ball, whatever you have handy that you can know how big it is. So the photo is sent to a dietitian, who then look at what's on the plate and does an estimation, with as much information. The more information we get from the individual, the more accurate we can be in terms of the assessment of what they are eating there. And yeah, that's basically what we do. And they typically take photos before and after the meal. So in case there's something left on the plate, then that's sort of considered as, of course, it has not been eaten, and then everything is adjusted to that. And in this case, I can't remember the exact numbers. I should probably have the paper here with me, but on average was around 4,300 calories or something like that they were having per day on average. So a quite significant mismatch between the total daily energy expenditure and the energy intake. So her carbohydrate requirements sort of seem to be covered, seem to be like, based on what the guidelines say, she was hitting about the target that you would expect an athlete to be ingesting in terms of carbohydrates. So she was not off with the carbohydrate intake, what athletes typically are. Athletes typically undereat carbohydrates. But the difference was so big that after that period of 8 days for the competition, the difference in body weight between the first day and the last day was 2.2 kilos.
That's a really interesting point, because just recently I'm thinking of examples of Thymen Arensman. He races for Ineos, and he went through the Giro. This is his first Grand Tour, and I believe that he gained, it was somewhere around 4 kilos, I think, that he gained from beginning to end Tadej Pogacar has recently been referenced as saying that he typically gains a little bit of weight throughout a tour. From what I understand, that's like from edema, from holding on to additional fluid that the body does in this case. I guess, number one, is that a correct assessment of why some athletes gain weight during this? And then what is your assessment as to why those athletes would be gaining weight while the athlete that you analyzed in this study was losing weight? Is it just simply down to the fact that she was carrying a caloric balance or a caloric deficit while these other athletes could have been carrying a surplus, or is there something else that causes the difference in weight?
Yeah, I cannot really speak for the other athletes. I can speak for what I know from our athletes. I can speculate what might be the case for others. One of the main things that seems to be limiting individuals to eat or enough energy to keep up with the demands of their sport is how big their stomach is, or how much food they can digest basically throughout. There seems to be some sort of that digestive limit in terms of how much energy they can put in. And I think a wise selection of food stuff might be able to counteract any sort of limits of digestion. And if you are selecting the right nutrients in terms of like energy density, so that is the amount of energy that there is per unit of whatever you put in your mouth. There's things that are more energy dense, and things that are less energy dense might be able to counteract your capacity to cover that energy expenditure during the race. So I don't know what these athletes are doing. I'd said to put 4 kilos of body weight in 3 weeks just from energy or an energy surplus while exercising at such a high energy expenditure. It sounds that it would need to be something else than sort of an energy intake, whether it is edema or not. I honestly wouldn't know if there's some sort of like fluid retention. Sounds quite a lot to me, and I suppose that a lot of people are not aware of the degree of variability that there can be in using different scales and so on. So we always have to be careful when we see like crazy changes in any parameter, how these things were measured. I'm not saying that they're lying or anything like that, but
Sure.
It's something that that's why when we do science, we are very pedantic about the measurement equipment we use, making sure that it's ideally always the same unit, in case there's an error that is off. At least it's not, at least it's reliable. Sure, we gotta make sure that it's calibrated and so on. But I think this is some of the things that we need to be careful with in interpretation of others' data.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So just for our listeners, because they really love the numbers, so I'm just going to explain tell them the energy expenditure that was on your paper, 7,572 calories on average per day. Is that right? It was in that average daily. And then their intake, 5,246 calories, meaning that their deficit was over 2,000 calories a day. And if we think about that, and at least when I was able to separate that in terms of like, without it being related to the colossal energy expenditure and energy intake, to be in a 2,000 plus calorie deficit every day is equivalent to someone maybe not eating for a week if they weren't so active, right? So that 2.2 kilogram weight loss is it's huge, right? In 8 days. So when we're looking at the macronutrient breakdown, she had a really high carbohydrate intake, like you said. I think that was almost a kilo of carbohydrates a day. And then reasonably high protein intake, so 2.4 grams per kilogram.
I would say I would say that's really high too. Like on the protein, I don't know, maybe you can provide some context on this, but the typical recommendation that we tend to see is 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day for an athlete that's in training. Dr. Areta, I don't know if you have a different perspective on that, but it's commonly suggested. However, what it sounds like is that it's not commonly followed, because it's actually pretty hard to eat that much protein, particularly when this athlete is doing these huge stages and then is doing a really good job at consuming carbohydrates at a rate of 13.7 grams per kilogram. That's really hard to do. Like, this is really impressive, diligent, intentional nutrition, like fueling, it seems like, from this athlete to be able to hit this. Is that number of 2.4 grams per kilogram of protein and 13.7 grams per kilogram of carbs, I don't know if you have the context for this, but is that typical for these sort of high-performing athletes to check both of those boxes so well?
Well, there's not a lot of data, so I cannot really compare it to any systematic assessment of other female athletes. What I can tell you is that it is in line, with what we see in male athletes, for sure, and it is in line with what the sort of recommendations are. So in that sense, we know they are hitting the right sort of target of carbohydrate intake. It is, as you're saying, on average, 13.7 grams per kilo per day of carbohydrates is what you would expect for someone doing the intensity and duration of efforts that she was doing. And it's, as Sarah said, it translates to roughly a kilo of carbohydrates per day. So we think, and this is not something that we reported in the actual study, but it's something that I looked into. It's quite limited, the space that we have to put information there. But if you look at the timing of the carbohydrate intake as well, it probably means that, the amount of carbohydrates that you were having post-race, so post-stage, and then before each following stage, it was probably enough for her to sort of synthesize as much muscle glycogen as she might need it for that stage. So while she was in an energy deficit, we think that she was fueling appropriately for having the most important fuel for this type of effort, which are carbohydrates. In terms of the protein intake, I'm not particularly concerned of it being a little bit high, because there's no evidence to show that's going to harm the athlete in any way, and it's sort of a byproduct of someone eating so much. So you gotta deliberately choose foods with like low protein intake, because if you're eating so much food, a percentage of it is going to be protein, and then you have a high protein intake. So going back to the importance of muscle glycogen, and this is what I think in part explains why the athlete was able to perform at a high level. And I think this is a key message for our study. In this whole idea of like the relative energy deficiency in sport, and to a minor extent the female athlete triad, there is this idea that low energy availability affects performance, either acutely or in a more chronic way. There's this idea of like maybe a short-term low energy availability doesn't have a negative effect on performance, but we show that this athlete potentially was exposed to low energy availability long term, because, as we said before, she came in with sort of alterations of the hormone T3, oligomenorrhea, and so on, and also had an acute, very pronounced energy deficit. And the average person might think like, oh my God, with such a big energy deficit, this might have a negative effect on performance. But then what happened with the performance of this athlete throughout the race? It didn't go down. It's difficult to have an objective assessment of performance. But when we looked at her power data values from the 8 stages, we see that she hit her best mean maximal power for like minutes, for 30 minutes and for 60 minutes at the end of the race. So on stages 7 and 8 is when she had her best performances in terms of power output. And this is really curious, because you go like, hang on, this athlete is being exposed to potentially chronic low energy availability. definitely acute low energy availability with that massive weight loss and inability to match the energy expenditure with the energy intake. Yet they are still able to perform at a really, really high level. So here there are a few things to think about. The first one is what happens, why is an athlete able to perform at a high level even if they don't have enough energy? So clearly staying active is very important for the body. So the body is going to prioritize staying physically functional in the face of energy deficit. So it seems that the body potentially might be shutting down some functions like reproductive function, but the capacity to move is such a high priority for survival. And this is when we bring a sort of evolutionary viewpoint to it, that the body is not seems to be shutting down that first. Yeah, so what I hypothesize is that locomotion is a high priority energy allocation task, whereby when you put someone in energy deficit, they are still going to be able to move, to perform. I don't know if it's at the highest level, but definitely at a high level. And then other functions that are not essential for immediate survival are going to be shut down. And then, we have to think that this athlete she was still able to perform at a high level. We don't know if she could have performed better had she fueled, matching the energy requirements. So we don't know that. What we know is that she still performed at a really high level. I think it was 10 days or about 2 weeks after this race, she went on to do the World Cycling Championships that took place in Glasgow in 2023, and she placed, as we report in that case study, 10th in the individual time trial. So it's clearly that she had been facing a long period of time for a energy deficit. We think acutely, definitely, but then she goes on to perform at a really high level. Could she have done better? Had she fueled better? Her training and so on. We don't know. But this is really interesting evidence, and we need more research to try to find out what's happening there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Can I go into the power data really quick, Sarah, on this one? Dr. Areta, this is my wheelhouse, and I was looking at this power data, and first thing I want to validate with this, above all, is the power meter. It seems that she was using a Shimano power meter. I don't know if you know the exact brand of the power meter. Is that correct? Yeah. Which that one recently, Tadej Pogačar mentioned the fact that he said he didn't trust power data anymore because power meters aren't accurate. But he uses that power meter. It's notoriously known for having those sort of the consistency issues that it has. I'm looking at stage 7, and I'm wondering if you have any sort of insight on this one. Stage 7 is a thoroughly impressive effort, 3 hours and 26 minutes and 32 seconds. The intensity factor, or in other words, like the percentage of her FTP that she was able to maintain throughout this race in terms of an average power perspective, was 92%, which these are world-class athletes that we're dealing with here. So they're going to have higher numbers than what we average people could see. If you're a fit cyclist, you might be able to do 0.9, like 90% of your FTP for like 2.5 hours or something, and 3.5 hours to do 92% is just super impressive. But then it's backed up when you look at the time trial thereafter the next day. They have a fantastic performance at the time trial, riding at their threshold for 31 minutes after, of course, accumulating so much strain over the prior 7 days. This is world-class data. For certain, this is like an athlete that is performing at an extremely high level. But I do have a question here on this one. Did that throw any alarm bells to see such high performances later on in the week? And then from your perspective as a coach, why do you estimate that this athlete may have been performing better and better as the race went on? Perhaps maybe it's a situation of them intentionally coming in kind of undercooked, so to speak, so then they could perform well.
No, not really. I think that the numbers are consistent throughout the race. So it's not that you see like a black swan, at the end of the race, and it's like, oh, what is this? But it's remarkable that it is better than the other days. It's not a lot better. It's not a lot higher. I looked at the power profile in different ways. You look at there was so much that we could put on a table in this case study, but I looked the mean maximal power from like 30 seconds all the way to like the whole duration of the stage, and the numbers were consistent. They were slightly better at the end, and it was driven by the characteristics of the stage mainly, I think. So stage 7, I think it was Alpe d'Huez, and then stage 8. So for all the stages also, she was not the athlete that was trying to win the race, but support someone else who's trying to, do well in GC. Whereas for the last stage, that is her specialty, and she's going for the win. So she's purposely putting her effort, to do the best she can. So there are, things that we have to consider that go beyond thinking that, oh, she's trying to her best in every stage all the time. And it comes, it's more related to the plan for the race with the team and so on.
Yeah. And I want to break that down for people. So stage 1, just over 3 hours, 0.77 IF. Stage 2, 4.5 hours, 0.8 IF. Stage 3 was 4 hours and 0.83. Stage 4 was 5 hours and 0.75. Stage 5 was 3.5 hours and 0.81. Stage 6, 3 hours and 0.86. Again, stage 7 was 3.5 hours at 0.92, and then stage 8, after all of that, 31 minutes, and then riding at an IF of 1. So right there at their threshold. So in other words, being an athlete that is effectively operating in a domestique role, most likely, but perhaps not a principal domestique role where they are this, the super domestique that's leading them up the climbs or anything else. But this can give us really interesting insight into how hard it is. And I think that it goes against a lot of chauvinistic narratives out there that like to imply that women's racing isn't as hard as men's racing. This is really cool data to see, and it's publicly available for everybody, which is just fantastic. Everyone can see this. That is like those numbers are higher than you would see with some men's races across the board. Now, granted, this is 1 week, so comparing a 1 week race to a 3 week race isn't quite the same. It should be held in context with a 1 week race as well. But that's high intensity for across those days. It's very impressive to see, especially keeping in mind how long those races are. It's not like they're out there TTing at 0.77 IF all day. It's going to be, there's a lot of periods of very high intensity all throughout. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that it was really interesting to take some time to look at the power, and I'm really grateful that you spent some time kind of going through and publishing this, because it's super insightful for women's performance in general.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's the way we really think about, sports nutrition is a lot about understanding the physiological and metabolic demands of the sport. So the fact that we have access to power data really is a luxury, really, to have an idea of what's happening physiologically to the athlete, because as you're probably a power nerd like I am, and like to think about what the physiological effects are in terms of like different intensities and so on, and how these relate to the energetic and nutritional requirements of the athlete. So we think it's very, very important to think everything as a unit. So nutrition is not separate of what happens physiologically. They are all part of the same thing. So nutrition is extremely complex, but one of the things and one of the ways in which we think about nutrition is really a sort of a physiological effect of it, a metabolic effect, and they're very much related to the requirements of what's happening on the crank, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we're thinking about performance, do you think there's much individual variation in between women in how sensitive they are to low energy availability, and then the effects of that on performance?
Yeah, well, Honestly, we don't know.
Right.
But we barely know how low energy availability affects performance in males or females. It's incredible that with weight loss being such a thing for people who are interested in any type of sport, that there is so little evidence, like objectively looking at the effect of weight loss on performance of any sport. So this is, I don't know. It's just like, I think it's a massive blind spot in the area, because there are people who are perpetuating the idea of like less weight is better, as much as there are people perpetuating the idea that like less weight is worse. And of course, as everything is not black and white, is quite complex. We definitely need more research, and I'm surprised that I were at this point in age and no one's really looked at this like properly. I mean, there's a reason why, because it's difficult. It's really, really difficult to study this. Most people don't like to go hungry. It's very difficult to control, to do it properly in the lab. Definitely not something that we can blind easily, because people are hungry, they lose weight. It becomes quite obvious that they are in a energy deficit, but some people might believe that is better for them, and then they perform better, and some people might believe that that's worse for them, and then they perform worse. So belief plays a huge role in how people perform. So I think the narratives that we build around the effect of energy deficit and performance might play a huge role in terms of like how someone might perform or not, whether men or females are more susceptible to that. Honestly, I don't know. I would love to have a clear answer for that question, Sarah, but I think we definitely need to do some more exploration in terms of research.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to see longitudinal studies done and like looking at then the effects and the time, like you said, like is performance initially perhaps enhanced by this low energy availability, and then at what point do we see those effects become detrimental, and how much individual variance is there?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
if you have the
exciting.
money to do that, we can do it for you.
I think that's probably a hard thing. It's hard for us to understand. We've played a very small role in a very small funding role in a handful of studies here at TrainerRoad. We've just had researchers reach out and they're like, "Hey, we know that you guys are interested in this field." And it's been like small things. Like it's been like, hey, like we need to be able to we need access to a metabolic cart for this day of testing or something like that. And is that something you can help with? And we've been able to help with that. When you actually look at the cost of studies, it's astounding. It's very, very expensive to carry out this research. It's never just like, I wonder if nobody's ever had this somebody, I guess, hasn't had this curiosity and decided to act on it. It's never, that's hardly ever the barrier. There's so many brilliant minds working on these things. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
Very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be better if the government didn't spend millions shooting bombs at each other and spends a bit more money in research. I think the world would be a better place.
Yeah, they should understand that our power to weight ratios are more important than such things, right? So, yeah, cool. Sarah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, so given, like, if you were to continue working with this athlete, what would your recommendations be for her moving forward? Like, if there was an upcoming stage race, would you be recommending her to adjust her approach? What would your
that is a great question for another one for which I don't really have a clear answer. I think we need to start thinking about what are the health implications potentially of someone being in that state all the time, and whether we need to do some sort of periodized approach with their nutrition. I'm not particularly concerned about an acute period of energy deficit for the athlete. From talking with the athlete and on a regular basis and so on, she felt great. She didn't even notice the weight loss. It was not something that was happening, and it was like, oh my god, I lost this weight. We're recording each morning, and just we do this, we do that. It was just retrospective that we went like, look, this is what happened. It was, what you see as the paper is something that has got a lot of thought and reflection on data we collected, and then we look at the data, interpret it, and we come with this potential explanation of what happened. But while it's happening, it's not that anything raised a massive red flag that we went like, oh my god, look at what's happening here, we did something wrong. Like, she bonked on stage number 7 because she was not eating enough carbohydrates, and then we went, okay, no, we clearly need to eat more carbs. So in that sense, I'm not convinced that she would have done better or worse if she had fueled more during the race. Maybe if the race went on for another week or 2, might be a different story. But then what I would be careful is in considering what are the implications of her being sort of chronically in not having enough energy. So I think it's important to think about okay, what is happening in her day-to-day fueling that, her period has not resumed in a way that is that is a normal menstrual cycle. Is there any other sort of situation that we need to be aware of? Of course, energy deficit is not the only reason why someone might lose their period. So I'm not aware of any sort of other health problems that this athlete might have had that was causing that problem. But this is something that we need to weigh sort of carefully and see if, we need to put this athlete in a potential energy surplus for a while and see what happens with her physiology, her endocrinology, and so on. But this needs to be talked with the athlete, see whether putting X amount of body weight would affect their performance. Need to talk with the team and so on. See if it's aligned with the aims. I think that the things that needs to be prioritized for the athlete is their health. We were talking with you guys just before we started recording this about this paper we published recently called Does Rest Exist?, where we critically evaluate the concept of relative energy deficiency in sport, saying that, we think that there's not enough evidence to say that it's just energy causing all the problems of relative energy deficiency in sport, and there might be a number of other sort of causes for what we historically thought it was only energy things. We need to consider other things like, the stress level of the athlete, the lack of sleep, any sort of problems with the infections and so on. There's a number of things that we need to be considering for the well-being of the athlete that give us a more holistic approach. And when I talk holistic, it's more like comprehensive. It's not like the woo-woo holistic type of description of the word, but it is more trying to look at the individual and say, okay, we're ticking the box of energy, but there are a lot of other things that we should be looking at. I think nutrition is extremely important. That's why I work in sports nutrition. But as I was talking before, we think about nutrition for the athlete in a way that is in a holistic way. It's related to their physiology, and it's related to a lot of other parameters that are essential for best performance of the athlete. So there are a lot of things that we need to consider of what this athlete might be needing.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, maybe we can get you back on to discuss that study another time.
Yeah, that would be great.
Jonathan,
for sure.
do you have any other questions?
No, I mean, I have like personal questions after this that I'd like to run by that I think are just me misunderstanding the data, and I don't want to bother everybody with that. So, but this has been super fun. Thank you, and thanks, Sarah, for leading us through this. This is just a fantastic study.
Thanks, Dr.
Sarah,
Areta.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Doctor, how can people support you? Is it just simply, is it funding your research? Is it is it going through and just connecting with you maybe on like, I don't know if you're active on social media or anything else, or following the university?
Yeah,
you
can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @JL Areta, Areta. That's where I, sometimes post about the research that we're doing or some interesting things related to this topic. You can find me on ResearchGate. Or, if you're someone who's interested in supporting more of this type of research, we would like to do more with this team, potentially on a training camp or something like that, or with another Tour de France. We definitely need some funding to be able to do these studies. There's a lot to do. We're leading the field in this area, and I think we think we have good ideas. We're just lacking maybe some support, which is hard to come by sometimes. So yeah, just reach directly to me. Maybe find me on Twitter or something like that. Shoot me a message, and we can definitely have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And let us know down below your comments, your thoughts on this study. There's a lot of revelations here. This is a very insightful study. We learn about the demands of the race from not only from a power perspective, but from an energetic perspective. We learn about the fact that an athlete can perform while in this acute deficit and increase their performance. Lots of really interesting things. So let us know your questions that you have down below. I have tons of them. I'm sure you have them too. And we'll talk to you all next time. Thank you.